The final message Pope Francis wrote before he died arrived quietly. It left the Vatican in complete silence. No one expected his last words to be about them, not about cardinals, not about the great leaders of the world. His words were about the small ones, the faithful ones, those who love without asking for anything in return. His final message was about dogs. The envelope was found beside his bed. It appeared just a few hours after his passing. It was sealed carefully. It felt like it held a piece of his soul. No high cleric knew this letter existed. What was written inside deeply moved the one man who read it first. He read it in silence. Then, he shared it with the world. That morning was Colonel. The world was still mostly asleep. A sealed envelope rested beside Pope Francis's bed. No cardinal knew about it. No official document mentioned it. Only one man knew this quiet, discreet detail: Massimiliano Strappetti. He was the Pope's personal nurse. Beside the envelope lay a small wooden rosary. It was aged by time, aged by the hands that had held it for years. A kind of peace filled the room. The peace that comes when the body rests, but the spirit still has something to say. Massimiliano hesitated for a few seconds. The atmosphere was calm but heavy. The Pope's room in Casa Santa Marta was silent. Francis had passed away a few hours earlier. He left with a slight smile. His gaze was serene. It was as if he knew the letter would find its way. The nurse held the envelope. His hands trembled. He knew there was more than just words inside. There was a farewell, a final reflection, perhaps a secret. But he wouldn't open it yet. Not there, not then. This letter was written with something stronger than ink. It was written with memories, with faith, with soul. Francis never wanted admiration for his position. He wanted connection through his simplicity. From his first day as Pope, he rejected luxuries. He gave up the symbols of power. He chose to live as he had before, with humility, with closeness, with his feet on the ground. He used to say, "You can only see heaven clearly when your feet are firmly on the earth." It was this humility that always brought him close to the people, especially the invisible ones, the poor, the sick, the forgotten, and also the animals. Francis didn't see them just as creatures. He saw them as silent souls. Souls praising God with their pure existence. That's why the sealed envelope wasn't surprising because it existed. It was surprising because of its intended audience. It wasn't addressed to the church, not to world leaders. It was a letter about something almost nobody knew about the Pope. A love born in childhood, a love that grew in youth, a love that stayed with him until his last breath, his love for dogs. To understand the origin of this love, we must go back in time, before the bells, before the crowds, before the Vatican. We return to Buenos Aires, Argentina, the 1940s, a simple neighborhood, narrow streets, humble houses. There lived a boy named Jorge Mario Bergoglio. He was the son of Italian immigrants. He grew up in a home filled with affection. Old books filled the shelves. The smell of freshly baked bread often filled the air. Faith was alive in every corner. His mother, Regina, was a deeply religious woman. Her voice was soft. Her presence was firm. She was the one who took the children to Mass. She taught them the value of prayer, the importance of honesty, the necessity of respect. But one lesson she repeated more forcefully than any other: love everyone without distinction. Love the poor, love the sick, love the different, and love the animals. Loving isn't just feeling, she would say while serving lunch or sewing by the dim evening light. It's caring, it's respecting, it's protecting all the creatures God placed under our gaze. Jorge listened to these words like someone drinking cool water. From a young age, he understood that true love is often silent. It often shows itself in simple, almost invisible gestures. Around this same time, something special happened. A puppy was abandoned at their doorstep. He was small and furry. His eyes were curious. His belly was round. Nobody knew where he came from. But Jorge had no doubts. He picked the puppy up in his arms. He looked at his mother. "He's staying," he said. Regina simply smiled. The puppy stayed. The nickname came quickly: Pelota. Ball. The puppy looked like a soft little ball. He rolled around the house without direction. Pelota became Jorge's inseparable friend. They slept together. They played in the yard. They shared pieces of bread during snack time. When Jorge felt sad, Pelota would lie beside him. He said nothing, yet he said everything. It was with Pelota that Jorge learned about unconditional love. He learned about fidelity without demands. He learned about presence without expectation. Once Jorge fell ill. He had a high fever, a persistent cough. Chills shook his small body. His parents took turns staying by his bed. Pelota, however, did not move from his post. Not for a single second. He lay at the foot of the boy's bed. He watched every breath. When Jorge cried, the dog licked his hands. When he slept, Pelota just watched him. His eyes were attentive. He seemed determined to protect him from all harm. It was then that a certainty formed in Jorge's mind, a certainty that would never leave him. A dog is not just an animal. A dog is a soul walking beside us. It is love that barks silently. Deep down, it is also a living prayer. Jorge grew up. He became a priest, then a bishop, then a cardinal. Pelota passed away eventually, as all living beings do, but his memory, his presence, and that unconditional love never left the future Pope's heart. So, when he arrived at the Vatican, already known as Francis, he didn't forget where he came from. He continued to walk with the same humility, with the same compassion, and sometimes, when he spoke of his childhood, his eyes would fill with tears. He remembered that little four-legged friend, the friend who taught him so much about God, and now, beside his final resting place, lay a letter, a sealed envelope, a last gesture. What that letter contained, you will discover soon. But for now, know this, hidden within the Pope's words was a secret of love, of faith, of childhood, and of a dog named Pelota. He arrived like miracles often do, without warning, without noise. His eyes seemed to already know the world. He was a small puppy, furry, his paws were clumsy. His gaze was full of curiosity. He had been left on the doorstep of the Bergoglio home one cold afternoon. He was wrapped in a makeshift blanket. No one knew his origin. No one knew who left him there. No one knew how long he had been alone. But when Jorge saw him, something ignited within him. It felt less like finding the dog and more like reuniting with him. It was the first time he felt that kind of connection, a bond needing no explanation, a kind of love that didn't need to be learned. It simply was. He carried the puppy in his arms to the kitchen. His mother was preparing homemade bread. "He's staying, right?" Jorge asked. His voice held a confident sweetness. He seemed to already know the answer. Regina, her apron dusted with flour, her heart shaped by faith and tenderness, just smiled. And so he stayed. He received the name Pelota. Jorge thought he looked like a little ball of bread, round and light, always rolling across the floor, searching for a bit of affection. "He looks like a little bread ball," Jorge would say, laughing. He watched his new friend explore the corners of the house. Pelota moved as if he had always belonged there. Pelota quickly became part of the family. But it was with Jorge that he formed an inseparable bond. They slept near each other. They shared bread crusts in the small yard. They invented adventures only the two of them understood. A silent, pure love existed between them. It didn't require words. Pelota understood gestures. He understood tone of voice. He even understood silence. When Jorge came home from school tired or sad, Pelota was the one who lay at his feet. He offered his snout as comfort. He simply stayed there, presence. That was what he offered. At that young age, through that simple presence, Jorge began to understand what it meant to love without asking for anything back. The days with Pelota profoundly marked Jorge's childhood. The simple house yard became a sacred field when they were together. There, Jorge laughed without fear. He cried without shame. He learned that true love demands no return. It simply happens. But it was during a difficult time that their bond proved stronger than ever. Jorge became ill. A persistent high fever kept him bedridden for days. His mother and father took turns watching over him. They were worried. They were attentive. But someone else refused to leave his side for even a minute. Pelota would not leave the room. He lay at the foot of the bed. He watched every breath Jorge took. He reacted to the slightest whimper of pain. One particularly difficult night, Jorge shivered with fever. Silent tears streamed down his face. Pelota moved closer. He gently licked Jorge's hands. He then lay down beside him. It was as if he wanted to carry some of the pain himself. That gesture remained etched in Jorge's soul. It felt like a prayer without words. It was there, that night, that he asked his mother a question. His voice was weak. His gaze drifted between the real world and the fever's delirium. "Mama," he asked, "Do dogs go to heaven too?" His mother came closer to the bed. She stroked his damp hair. She answered with firmness and tenderness. "God creates nothing without love," she said softly. "Everything he loves returns to him." Jorge closed his eyes. In that instant, though his body was sick, his soul filled with peace. He believed her. That phrase became a pillar for him. Pelota wasn't just a dog. He was a sign from God. He was love in living form. From then on, Jorge began to see all animals with that same perspective. Pure creatures, created with tenderness, deserving of care and respect. This wasn't a theoretical lesson. It was lived daily, learned with Pelota's paws walking beside him. Time passed. Jorge grew older. Childhood faded, but Pelota remained. He didn't run like he used to, but he still waited at the door. White fur began to appear around his muzzle. His eyes lost their youthful sparkle, but they never lost the light of faithfulness. When Pelota finally passed away, Jorge remained silent for days. He didn't cry in front of anyone. But in the school chapel, during a solitary prayer, he let the tears fall, and he gave thanks. He thanked God for having known that small being, a being so immense in love. Pelota had taught him something no catechism class ever could. Presence is one of the deepest forms of love. Loving animals is loving God in what he created with the most purity. When Jorge entered the seminary, he already carried within him a sensitive spirituality. It was oriented not just toward humans, but toward all forms of life. This sensitivity accompanied him through every stage. As a priest, he sought closeness with people, but he also showed affection for the community's animals. When he became a bishop, he still visited shelters for rescued dogs. He often said there was more holiness in an animal's grateful gaze than in many empty speeches. Jorge's view of animals wasn't one of pity. It was one of reverence. He knew they taught lessons about faithfulness, about silence, about forgiveness. And he never forgot his mother's words, "Everything created with love returns to God." Pelota, for him, was one of those beings, a silent teacher, a faithful companion, a divine gift. This bond, forged in childhood, became an essential part of his worldview. That's why, even in the Vatican as Pope Francis, his perspective didn't change. He would walk through the gardens. He greeted groundskeepers who had dogs by their side. He blessed animals brought by the faithful. In private conversations, he liked to remember Pelota. He was chubby, playful, he'd recall, and he taught me more than I knew. That love, forged in simple days and afternoons of bread and affection, shaped his heart. And when the time for farewell arrived, when his body grew tired and his soul began preparing for its return, he knew he had to leave something rich. Not for the great, not for the powerful, but for the small, for those who feel before they think, for those who wait without demanding, for those who love until the very end, for the dogs. When Jorge Mario Bergoglio was elected Pope, the world watched white smoke rise over Rome. Inside him, however, nothing fundamental changed. He arrived at the papacy with the same eyes that had welled up in childhood before an abandoned puppy. He decided from the first moment he would be a different kind of pope. He refused the luxuries of the Vatican. He gave up the traditional papal apartments. He chose to live in Casa Santa Marta. It was a simpler, welcoming place, closer to the employees, closer to visitors, closer to those who didn't wear cassocks. He said he could only keep hearing God if he kept hearing ordinary people and animals. Francis maintained humility as his guide. He never stopped being the priest who walked the streets of Buenos Aires, listening to stories, welcoming pain. This simplicity also showed in small daily gestures, the kind that don't make headlines but deeply touch those who witness them. He greeted heads of state with the same warm smile he offered gardeners and cleaning staff. Whenever he saw a dog nearby, his eyes lit up. A brightness came from deep within. On several occasions, Francis surprised onlookers. He would bend down to pet dogs near outdoor masses. There was a special day during a celebration in Assisi. A stray dog approached the altar. Guards tried to shoo him away, but the Pope raised his hand. He asked them to let the dog stay. He smiled. He bent down. He whispered something in the animal's ear. After that, the dog lay down beside the pulpit. He remained there until the end of the Mass. He looked completely at home. Francis also received letters from children around the world. They told stories about their pets. Many spoke of loss, of longing, of faith. He took the time to respond. He wrote in his own hand. His words were simple and affectionate. He often mentioned Pelota, his childhood dog. He told them how Pelota had taught him about patience, about forgiveness, about presence. He would tell the children, "If your pet loved you like that, then you have already known the love of God." Once, during a private conversation with a close aide, he said something unforgettable. "A faithful dog taught me more about God than many books." It was a simple sentence, but it was heavy with wisdom. For Francis, animals revealed aspects of the divine that escape human logic. The silent loyalty, the gaze that understands without words, the love that persists even in absence. As time went on, Francis grew quieter. Not from weakness, it was from contemplation. He spoke less, he smiled more. His eyes seemed to look inward, like someone beginning to say goodbye, not to the world, but perhaps to words themselves. One day, he asked for paper and a pen. There was no rush. He wrote calmly. Each sentence seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime. When he finished, he sealed the envelope gently. He placed it next to his wooden rosary. He said nothing about its contents. Massimiliano held the envelope with the same care one holds something sacred. He sat in the simple wooden chair by the window. Casa Santa Marta was quiet. His hands trembled slightly. His heart felt tight. Outside, Rome was just beginning to wake up. But inside that silent room, time seemed to stand still. He took a deep breath. He broke the seal. He slowly unfolded the handwritten letter. The script was firm and serene. It was Pope Francis's hand. He read the first lines in silence. Soon, the words began to echo within him, as if whispered directly into his ear. It was more than a farewell. It was an intimate prayer, a declaration of faith, and a sweet confession of love. "When I was just a child," the letter began, "I met the purest love I have ever seen on earth. It had a name. It smelled faintly of fresh bread. It had eyes that followed me with tenderness. His name was Pelota. He was not a theologian. He wore no cassock. He knew no formal prayers, but he taught me everything I needed to know about God. He taught me to be present, to listen with the heart, to wait without rushing, to forgive without resentment. He taught me that true love demands nothing. It simply remains." Massimiliano felt tears welling in his eyes. He continued reading. "Throughout my life, I tried to carry this lesson silently. Life took me far, from priest to bishop, from cardinal to pope. I knew the grand halls, the stone altars, the carefully prepared speeches, but none of it weighed as heavily on my soul as those moments. Moments when a dog would lie at my feet, expecting no applause. Moments when I understood that God's love also manifests in the creatures the world considers small." Francis wrote with clarity. No vanity, no complicated theology, just truth. If we learn to love like a dog loves faithfully, without judgment, without measure, we are already on the path to God. Massimiliano read that sentence 3 times. It seemed to summarize an entire life, an entire mission. The Pope who charmed the world with his humility now left his final message, not to the powerful, but to the sensitive, to those capable of seeing the divine in simple things. The letter continued. "Perhaps many will wonder, why did I leave these words? Why speak of animals when the world expects grand discourses on faith or morals? But I believe that speaking of true love is speaking of God, and animals, especially dogs, know how to love with a purity we often lose as we grow up. They hold no grudges. They do not forget kindness. They never tire of waiting." In the second to last part of the letter, Francis returned to the teaching from his childhood, learned from his mother. Love God above all things. Love your neighbor as yourself. And yes, also love the animals, because they are God's creatures. If the Creator himself made them with affection, who are we to ignore their existence, their pain, their faithfulness? Massimiliano could no longer hold back his tears. This wasn't just a text. It felt like a sacred passage. And then, he read the final sentence, the one that sealed the letter like a spiritual testament. "Pelota will wait for me in heaven, and when I arrive, he will lick my hands." Because heaven is also this, returning to love without fear. The room became even quieter, but it wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of reverence, of presence, of that which remains even when everything else is gone. Massimiliano folded the letter carefully. He held it against his chest. He knew this paper contained something the world needed to hear, not to idolize a man, but to remember the essential truth. Loving with purity brings us closer to God. Sometimes the greatest teachers come on small paws, with giant hearts. If you have ever been loved by a dog, you know exactly what Pope Francis was talking about. There are loves that need no words to be eternal. They live in the eyes that follow us with trust, in the silent waits by the door, in the simple gestures that carry absolute love. It was this kind of love the Pope wanted to record in his final message. Not a theological treatise, not an official pronouncement, but a whisper from soul to soul, a reminder that God also reveals himself in the simplicity of a faithful gaze. Francis's letter was not a testament of power. It was a testament of tenderness. He chose to end his mission speaking of the small, the forgotten, the pure. That says so much about the man he was. In a world where everything shouts, he chose the silence of a dog lying at one's feet, because in the end, what matters most is not what we possess, but what and how we have loved. The simple, unwavering love reflected in the eyes of a dog held, for Pope Francis, the echo of the divine. It was a final lesson in humility, learned long ago in a Buenos Aires yard, and shared with the world from the heart of the Church, a reminder that faith finds its deepest expression in love for God, love for neighbor, and love for every creature crafted by the Creator's hand.